Let's talk to Ameet in New York.
Okay.
Ameet, welcome to the show. You have a question about evaluating information from groups with biases?
Yeah. Hi, V. Hi, Eric.
Hi,
Hello.
how have you been?
I have been good. Busy, but good.
Good.
I had a question for the two of you. I know, Eric, you mentioned at the beginning of the show, hey, you need to be skeptical. You need to think, hey, then maybe there's not that secret group out there that's trying to take away your rights, kind of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And immediately that made me go back to a quote-unquote documentary that I was watching a while ago called The Family.
Yes,
which talks about
seen
a Christian group.
Yes.
You've seen it,
I
right?
have,
Yeah.
I have.
And right. And because I happen to agree with you and with the two of you and with a lot of people on one side of the political spectrum and one side of the belief spectrum. And when I listened to the documentary, I found myself going, yeah, that makes sense. But that's probably not the most skeptical way to go about it in my head.
Yeah.
So my question is, there also a secret cabal somewhere out there, making decisions and influencing policy. How do I evaluate the things on my side of the fence the same way that I do things on the other side of the fence? I find myself falling for confirmation bias.
Oh man.
Yeah.
And the documentaries they put out are so good at bypassing a lot of those first red flags. I was watching this UFO documentary on, I think it was Hulu or HBO or something the other year. And I was finding myself going well, they put a document on screen and it looks like an official document. I can't read it, but it looks legit. And then they started going into and Burl Ives was in on it. And that's why the Marilyn Monroe was murdered, was because she knew about Area 51. And I was just oh, I'm in too deep. I need to get out. It was bad.
Wow.
Yeah.
I do have thoughts.
Go
here.
for it.
I would love to just jump in real fast. So, the difference, the Family documentary, I believe it's on Netflix, is is different than your typical, late night History Channel UFO thing. It does have some backing. I think the key here, Ameet, because it really is difficult to have this conversation without acknowledging that there is currently a group of very aggressive, conspiracy-minded people actively trying to take over things, right? And to do what people claim that aliens are trying to do or the lizard people are trying to do.
And rewrite evidence or rewrite history to evidence it.
Exactly. So that is happening. The conspiracy theory angle is, and it's all a secret and no one knows but me. If you were to watch the Family documentary as somebody who grew up in a very similar worldview like I did, it wasn't secret, right? Nobody in to those of you who don't know what the Family is, I realize that we're going on this thing assuming you know.
We're going to have to watch it this evening.
Essentially, it's the claim that this person made who was inducted into a Jesus cult, essentially, as a teenager. Very pretty standard at first, abstinence, boy, the bro-y, brothers in Christ,
Okay.
live on a house in some politician's backyard or whatever. And essentially what those groups were trying to do, he wasn't the only group, they were trying to groom people to actively infiltrate the government from the ground up and eventually take it over and make it into a Christian nation. And it was talking about how certain people already were in place in this organization and how they were funneling money to other countries to fund Christian takeovers there. And I'm not saying it's all accurate. I have no way of knowing that. But I do want to push back on the idea that it was a secret ever, because if you were anywhere where those people were, they were actively talking about doing that. And no one took them seriously. In the same way that right now we're seeing people talk very blatantly about anti-trans stuff, or, moving into this really scary cleansing mentality around trans people, they're not being quiet about it. They just aren't being taken seriously yet. And so if in 20 years somebody made a documentary about this secret, quote unquote, cabal of anti-trans people who were trying to eliminate trans people from the United States, to a lot of people who weren't aware that it's currently happening now, it would feel very much like a conspiracy theory. But the fact is, there is a difference between saying it's all a secret because there are top secret people who are working in the underground and no one knows but me, and oh no, they are talking about this. It's just no one is taking them seriously or listening and actually understanding what they're advocating for. And so that would be the key difference for me. But I'm curious what your thoughts are there.
So, to be fair, I didn't grow up in that sort of an environment, so I was not hearing this outright, right? So I'm hearing this from a third-party perspective. And when I hear these claims, I think, oh, okay, well, I hear the claims, and I instantly start thinking, well, aren't the other side of the political spectrum also saying the same thing? Aren't they using certain groups of people and saying, well, they're out in the open and that this is their agenda and stuff like that? And I just happen to agree with one side. How do I vet the sources in this while coming from a third party perspective,
Ooh, so V has some specialized training in this. The only thing that I would add before you kind of impart that particular wisdom is, Ameet, it has a lot to do with recognizing you're not going to get rid of your own bias. You're not. You are just as human as anybody else. And the fact that you have bias doesn't make you bad. Recognizing that you are biased and making sure that you are harder on things that you agree with will help. It is keeping a watchful eye, especially when something sounds like it fits into your worldview way too easily. And it is a paranoid, rough way to live your life. And it is so freaking rewarding because you don't fall into those traps. And that's a general bit of advice that I would give to anybody there, that, hey, guess what? If you're human, you have a bias. Recognize your bias and be especially hard on those things. But V's got probably a lot more, direct stuff.
Well, I've definitely done a couple of videos on how to vet sources, so I'm not going to go over all of that. But what I would say, Ameet, is we need to make sure that we're not missing, like the goal is never to say this thing could never happen and everything in that category is categorically conspiracy because that could never happen, right? So we are now in a place where we can say, okay, 3 different people are saying that the government is being taken over. Person A says it's being taken over by Christians. Person B says it's getting taken over by liberal communists. And person C says it's being taken over by aliens, right? So the argument there could be, for some people, oh, well, the government being taken over is a conspiracy theory, so all of them are wrong. And that gets rid of the alien person for sure. But what it doesn't do is get ready for if there ever is a government takeover, or actively evaluate the evidence that is being brought to the table. So I don't think that the problem is the action of a government takeover. That is not the conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theories then try to explain it in a very particular way. So the only person of those 3 who I would call a conspiracy theorist is the person who believes in aliens, because no matter how much you sit down with them and talk through it, they're only ever going to provide you with, oh, well, I heard this source from somewhere, or, oh, look at this blurry photo that was better explained by something else, or the quality of their evidence and the leaps that they are making from piece of evidence to piece of evidence is where that conspiracy theorist mindset comes into play, right? The quality of their evidence for this claim is bad, just objectively. The other 2 might have actual evidence, And then it becomes a question of, okay, who is making assumptions about whether or not that is good or bad and why, right? So the person who says, well, liberal communists are taking over, granted, liberal communist is a misnomer and can't exist. But the idea that, okay, so you're seeing active legislation being passed to increase gender equality, increase, right to reproductive rights and equal pay and all of these things that you classify as liberal communist, right? And so, yes, that is actively happening. And we are also seeing people pushing back on that and saying, no, we're actually going to start banning people from using pronouns in school for some reason, or we're going to advocate for book burnings. And so both of those things are happening. Now it just becomes a question of, okay, so government takeover is a big word for that. It's dramatic. So are, all Christians. That's not accurate. And so inaccurate is liberal communists. But what we can acknowledge is that both of those people have a point of view and have evidence to back that up. And now we have to decide, do we agree with either of these people, right? And then it no longer is in the realm of conspiracy theory. It becomes a conversation about, should government takeovers be good or bad? Like, is that always a bad thing? Is it always a good thing? Should there be government? Which is another conversation entirely. If somebody were to take over the government, what would that person have to bring to the table for me to see it as a good thing? And what things are red flags to me? And so then we have the conversations around, we should be pushing for even more, quote unquote, liberal communist agendas. Or, oh no, we need to crack down even harder and become even more godly as a result. So the argument I'm making here, and it's a very roundabout way of doing it, the government takeover aspect, the action itself, unless it inherently entails a supernatural element, is not the conspiracy theory. The conspiracy theory component comes from the leaps you make and the kind of evidence that you bring to the table. After that, we have to contend with the very real possibility that things do happen that are huge and terrifying and coordinated. And then we have to decide which side has evidence and what evidence do we agree with, and how are we weighing that morally? But those are two very different conversations to have, is my point. Does that make any sense?
No, that helps a lot, Lee. Thank you so much. Thank you, Eric, for also offering your insight. Obviously I'm not the best skeptic. I'm just trying to be better.
Same here. We didn't go to college for this. We are two assholes on the internet with a YouTube show. Like, take everything we say with a grain of salt. But the fact that you're trying, the fact you're working on it is wonderful.
And the fact that you were able to identify where a red flag was popping up and being like, oh wait, this documentary with its like intense music and like shadowy figures and like weird camera angles, that is going to evoke a response from you. That's the goal. So in general, if you ever come across something that seems to be relying more on the emotional piece than the actually like factual piece, that doesn't mean that it's wrong automatically, right? There could very well be an emotional component that, is packaging this true thing. But the best thing to do is exactly what you did, which is realize that that's happening and then step away and be like, okay, how would I prove that this were true if this thing was actually happening and I wasn't being influenced by the emotional piece of it?
Okay.
So yeah, keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you, both of you. Really appreciate your input.
Absolutely.
And thank you for having this conversation every week. But
yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for calling in, Ameet.
Okay.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, you went on a sprint.
I did. I'm curious. I'm going to look back at that and see if I agree with it later. I feel like that made sense, but
I did a whole thing in the call prior, which I'm already embarrassed about.
Oh my gosh.
So we might need to lick our wounds later. But being honest and saying, hey, we're trying. That's the best we can do.